All right, so those were some of the highlights from President Donald Trump's State of the Address, which we just heard from Capitol Hill. And to discuss the implications of what this address means, and is Donald Trump trying to strike a reconciliatory tone, especially when it comes to the policy of immigration, we're joined by Kate Fisher, WION's correspondent, who joins us from Capitol Hill. Kate, what we've heard from President Trump, he's spoken in terms of, in fact, using these 4 pillars that he's very clearly put forth to try and address the issue of immigration. Many people will say that this is in fact the highlight of his entire State of the Union address. Do you think he's trying to strike a reconciliatory tone, considering the fact that DACA was one of the key reasons as to why the US administration had to shut down? The Senate simply did not pass it, and now Donald Trump is almost willing to admit 1.8 million of these young immigrants who'd been brought into the United States while they were still young children by their parents.
Yes, certainly it is one of the main features of this speech, one of the main issues that he wanted to push and to get across and to make a centrepiece. And he said, yes, he is willing to give on that subject for offering citizenship to 1.8 million of those so-called dreamers, children, people who came to the US as children, as the children of illegal immigrants who were undocumented. He is willing to extend citizenship to them. However, in return, he wants to have a border wall built along the southern border and full enforcement of that wall. Also, the end to the visa lottery and a move towards making those green cards a much more merit-based system, and an end to what is described as chain migration. That is, the other family members of people who are living in the US being allowed to come here because their family members are already here. The problem with this is, although many Democrats will be pleased to hear about his concessions on DACA, the concern is that they do not want a border wall, they do not want to end chain migration, and they do not want to end the visa lottery. So it really depends whether they are willing to give on those three issues in order for the DACA proposal to go through.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, let's talk a bit about what Donald Trump had to say about North Korea and Iran. He's in fact called the North Korean leader a cruel dictator. How's that going to go down within the United States? And also in terms of how the US is in fact trying to, resolve the nuclear crisis with North Korea.
That's right. He described Iran and North Korea as rogue regimes. He referred to the protests that had taken place in Iran recently and said that he stood with the Iranian people and their search for freedom. Also, in the audience, he brought the parents of Otto Warmbier, who was the American student who was being held captive in North Korea, and he was released, but shortly after his release, he died from injuries sustained during that era of captivity. So the president really highlighting what he describes as the brutality of the North Korean regime by bringing Otto Warmbier's parents to the capital to listen to this speech. He also, another invited guest of the president, was a North Korean defector who had risked his life to escape North Korea. Again, the president highlighting the problems, the brutality of North Korea and the lengths that people will go to leave it. So yes, North Korea and Iran were both touted as enemies of the United States, rogue regimes, and certainly two countries that the president wants to make sure that the US comes out on top in any conflict.
Absolutely, indeed. But my question to you is, will the US president actually get the support for pursuing this policy by his own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who has got a completely different approach, especially in the case of North Korea?
Absolutely. They do seem to not be quite on the same page. However, Donald Trump is the president, and of course he can sack whoever he wants in his cabinet. And if he believes that Rex Tillerson isn't doing as he wishes, then it would be the president, I'm sure it would be the president's decision and desires that would take precedence over Rex Tillerson's. I'm not sure whether anything in this speech will have changed his Secretary of State's mind or not. There's always been a question mark over his job. He says, and the President maintains, that he will be staying in his job and continuing his work. But yes, certainly they have publicly made slightly different statements on the future of the policy of America towards North Korea.
And also, he spoke extensively on his achievements domestically. He spoke of the economy being upbeat, jobs being created, and also indicated that black Africans, the unemployment levels were extremely low among them under his presidency. How is this going to go down within the American polity there?
Yeah, he did something of a victory lap on the domestic policies he feels that he has excelled in. And certainly this kind of rhetoric will really appeal to his base, to the people who voted for him to become president. And also, perhaps, it will appeal to other conservatives, Republicans who maybe weren't too sure about Donald Trump, but these kind of things, jobs, the economy, tax reform, it really matters to traditional Republican voters. So he may well have strengthened and widened his appeal somewhat amongst those people. However, in terms of the increase in jobs for African Americans, some would argue that, in fact, that is a result of the policies of his predecessor that had, and it's only now that we are seeing the effects. So things like that will always be debated on both sides here. But yes, I do think that him touting his successes on those fronts will appeal to his voting base and also probably appeal to more of the moderate Republicans.
Absolutely, indeed. And in his entire address, Kate, he mentioned Russia only once. Is there a message that needs to be read in that? Is he a president that is seeking greater cooperation with Russia? How do you view this, especially in the recent developments? He's also been accused of having been helped by the Russians in winning his presidential election. Is there a message that needs to be read in this?
Certainly, I think Russia was the elephant in the chamber. It wasn't really referred to. That would probably have been a thought-out decision by he and his team. It's obviously the Russia investigation has overshadowed his first year in office and has taken a lot of the attention away from the work that he says he is trying to do. I imagine he and his team decided that it wasn't worth bringing it up and attracting more attention to it during this speech, and there were other topics, other areas that he wanted to highlight. Certainly that is an ongoing investigation, and he has not enjoyed the spotlight that it has brought, and I guess it was a decision to really not go anywhere near that particular subject in this speech.
Right. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Kate Fisher, for having joined us from the Capitol Hill and for having given us those inputs as to what this State of the Address speech by US President Donald Trump actually means. In many ways, it's been a conciliatory approach that's been taken by the US President. At a time when the economy is booming, the US President's ratings also seem to be going down. So this is something which the US administration will ponder upon.